The debate over the missing data under the NDA government explodes. A day after 131 chartered accountants challenged 108 economists and rubbished claims of the centre's influence in economic data, today Finance Minister Arun Jaitley weighs in. In his point-by-point attack, he says that 108 economists who raised an alarm are politically motivated against the Modi government.
उसमें 70% वो हैं जिन्होंने पिछले 5 वर्ष में राजनीतिक विषयों के ऊपर एक नहीं एक अनेक मेमोरेंडम्स और बयान इस सरकार के खिलाफ दिए हैं। वो अब निष्पक्ष अर्थशास्त्री बनके सरकार के डेटा को क्वेश्चन कर रहे हैं। जो सबसे अधिक प्रतिष्ठित संस्थाएं हैं डेटा के संबंध में, IMF और वर्ल्ड बैंक हमारे डेटा को स्वीकार करते हैं। जो अर्थव्यवस्था इतनी तेज गति से इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर बना रही है, 10,000 किलोमीटर के हाईवे, 135 किलोमीटर प्रतिदिन की ग्रामीण सड़कें, नए पोर्ट्स, नए एयरपोर्ट्स, नए शहरों के अंदर मेट्रोस, बड़ी बड़ी सड़कें, ग्रामीण क्षेत्रों में घरों के अलावा शौचालय, बिजलीकरण, पूरे देश में पावर हाउसेस, आज हम दुनिया के सबसे दूसरे नंबर के निर्माता बन गए हैं। और फिर कहना ये सारी वृद्धि से नौकरियां नहीं बढ़ रही, इससे बड़ा झूठ और मिथ कोई नहीं होगा।
Mirror now asks, if the data with the government is credible, why not make it public? If the Indian economy has created a record number of jobs, why isn't the NDA government putting out numbers? Is India's job crisis a myth? Let's debate.
Good evening. The big debate this election season is over-employment. Yesterday we brought you the big poll survey that showed 42% of the voters believe employment is the biggest issue this election season. So no wonder that it is dividing our experts, it's dividing our voters, and it's also bringing out the big guns into the public for debate. Today it was the Finance Minister Arun Jaitley who weighed in with a comment and a detailed blog. Now here is how different versions stack up in the accountants versus economists versus Arun Jaitley or the government debate. Point number one, what is it that the 108 economists said a few days ago? They said that the CSO and the NSSO are being subjected to political interference. What is it that Finance Minister Arun Jaitley said today? He said CSO functions professionally and independently. What is it that the 131 chartered accountants who came out yesterday slamming the Economists said? That the Economists are politically motivated, just like the award Wapsi gang. Now, if you remember, viewers, last week when this debate first broke out, that's exactly what we said the Economists will be called. Next aspect where there is a difference of opinion on the GDP series. Economists say that the revised GDP series benefits NDA and there is a data mismatch on the macroeconomic indicators that have been picked up. Finance Minister Arun Jaitley says 2014 to 2019 has witnessed the fastest ever economic growth, and there is no debate about that. 131 chartered accountants say changing GDP base year is a regular feature. It's not like it happened the first time under the NDA. In fact, the entire process of a new GDP series calculation began under the UPA. What's the other aspect of disagreement between these camps? Economists say government is withholding unprecedented unemployment data. The data by NSSO that was supposed to be released in December 2018 hasn't been given out. Arun Jaitley says unemployment with development is a myth. So if the country is growing at the current rate that it is, then how can it be that an unemployment is the reality of our country? 131 chartered accountants say India is the fastest growing economy in the world. And this goes on. The charge against the government by 108 economists is that the government is intentionally withholding data, pressurizing the institutions who are supposed to analyze and give us these statistics. Arun Jaitley says credible institutions have accepted government data. You have the IMF and the World Bank praising our economy and our country. What are you talking about? And the chartered accountants are backing the government, saying credible institutions have accepted our data. So where do we stand over this big missing data debate, and what's really the true picture of our economy? That's the big debate this evening. Mr. R. Nagaraj, professor with the IGIDR, joining us this evening. Mr. Ramakumar joins us once again, economist with the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. I also have Mr. Santosh Mehrotra, professor of economics at Center for Informal Sector and Labour Studies at JNU, and Abhishek Mishra, leader of the BJP, will be with us shortly. Unfortunately, we had one of the chartered accountants who was part of this group who was to join us but had a personal emergency, so had to cancel last minute. But let me go across to Professor Nagaraj first and ask him, not so much on what the CAs have said first, but on what Arun Jaitley has said. The label there is compulsive contrarians. What's your response?
Yeah, I was thinking about this term when I heard Finance Minister say this. If we are compulsory contrarians, then you cannot accuse us of being politically motivated, because in the previous government also we were contrarians and we were criticizing the government. So we take the governments to task when we find the things are not all right, whether the government data or government's analysis. So our job is of professional economists. We analyze the data in light of the theories we have, right? So if we are compulsory contrarians, then we cannot be accused of being politically motivated.
Right. Professor Nagaraj, if I may just ask you, because this is what Arun Jaitley has said in his blog, most of them, meaning the 108 purported economists, as he calls them, most of them have over the last few years repeatedly signed memorandums of manufactured political issues against the present government. Now, this is a big allegation and a big charge at the credibility of those economists who have spoken out. But if I may ask you, have you actually signed any memorandums or been part of any other campaign questioning government policies or data?
No, I have been an economist and I have analyzed the government policies in various occasions, and they're all available in public domain. And I have done this for the last 30 years as a professional economist. Okay, so but we have not signed. We have looked at specific policies, not party politics. If the policies are right, we have said yes, that it's correct. If the policies are not right, or if the data behind them is questionable, we have raised issues. Okay, so this is what an independent economist are supposed to do. We do research and we teach, okay, and we maintain our professional independence, and that is what I think our job is. And our job is not political job, and you cannot accuse us of being politically motivated.
Okay, all right.
Okay? We have done our professional job as careful commentators.
Yes, I take your point.
Okay.
But Professor Ramakumar with me in the studio, it's the same question to you. In the interest of full disclosure to our viewers, and you've been part of this conversation with us now for multiple debates, have you been part of any other motivated or manufactured campaigns against the government?
Well, I have been in the past. I have signed, I don't exactly remember how many, but I'm sure 2 or 3 letters I have signed during the previous government as well, as well as during the current government.
Yeah.
We have signed letters related to the poor functioning of the MGNREGS.
Yes.
We have signed letters concerning the poor design of the National Food Security Act. We have signed letters related to the Right to Information Act, Forest Rights Act. So we have written letters to the government off and on during the previous government as well as the current government. So there is the charge of politically motivated and the compulsive contrarian argument doesn't quite wash.
But it's true, you are a compulsive contrarian irrespective of if it's UPA or BJ or NDA in power then.
To the extent that Mr. Arun Jaitley is an obsessive loyalist,
Yes.
I am a compulsive contrarian.
Okay, all right. Let's get to the actual facts then, and the point of discussion here. Obviously, there are 2 big themes. One is the unemployment data. The second is the GDP. And Mr. Santosh Mehrotra, I'm going to come to you first, since we've had numerous, and I think now I've lost count of the debates we've had on unemployment and various data. What is your response to what Arun Jaitley is saying? And he says that, look at our growth numbers, and if this is our growth, then unemployment has to be a myth.
Well, the finance minister is right in claiming that jobs are growing, but jobs are always growing. As youth are entering the economy, the jobs are always growing. The real issue is, are they growing as fast as the number of entrants into the labor force? And if they are not, then the unemployment rate will rise, which is what has happened. I don't have to say anymore. Jobs are always growing, and jobs are always growing even in the organized sector. So it's not a question about absolute level of rise in jobs. It's perfectly possible that in manufacturing there might be an absolute decline in the number of jobs, as has happened, and as the data itself demonstrates. But that doesn't mean that overall jobs are not growing. Jobs can still be growing.
Okay, so let's take at the data.
So I don't know what.
Yes, let's take a look at the data that is being cited by Finance Minister and then take it one by one. Here is what he says. The recent survey of MSME published by Confederation of Indian Industry, or CII, in the month of March 2019 covers 1,05,345 firms of varying sizes across sectors and geographies. Now, this survey indicates a growth of 13.9%, almost 14% in net jobs created over the last 4 years. That's about 3.3% per annum of compounded growth rate. He also goes on to say that given that the total workforce size, according to Labour Bureau, is about 450 million, overall job additions work out to about 13.5 to 14.9 million per year. What do you think of this data and the argument being presented here, Mr. Mehrotra?
Well, I think the only data which is truly reliable are three sources of data on jobs. One is the CMIE data, which has a national sample, 166,000 households. The second is the annual survey of the Labour Bureau, which is roughly similar sample size, slightly smaller. And the third source is the NSS 1718, about which we already know. Now, all three are giving reinforcing evidence. And please remember that all three of them have in their sample the organized sector, which is what the CII survey would be capturing, as well as the unorganized sector. So, obviously, the three surveys that I have just mentioned, which are reinforcing each other and which are nationwide and representative at the national level, are going to be more reliable than what the CII has done. And honestly, I would doubt the capability of the CII to conduct a survey of this kind in the first place.
Okay. In fact, I'm being told that we have Mr. Rajesh Sharma, council member of the ICAI, which is the Chartered Accountants Association. Mr. Sharma, thank you for speaking to us. It's a very colorful statement that the 131 Chartered Accountants have released, and obviously you have your own reasons to say what you did. But frankly, if you are going to make the charge that the economists, 108 economists, are politically motivated, then this sentence appears more politically motivated too when you say allegations appear choreographed and resemble the various previous award wapsi drama. Award wapsi drama is actually a political phrase that was coined at that point of time. And if you use such phrases, shouldn't questions be asked of you about being politically motivated?
Basically, I can say it's something which is coming exactly during the election time. Why it comes during the election time? And many of the persons who are social researchers or so-called social researchers are coming across, who are staying across the world, are coming together or putting this type of message to give and tarnish the credibility of our country this cannot be taken because everyone is knowing that India is growing. India is the fastest growing economy and it is India's era. And during this session, if someone tries to tarnish the image of
You know, Mr. Rajesh Sharma, that India is the fastest growing economy.
Or try to question Indian agencies.
Based on what data are you saying that?
We chartered accountants. You listen to me first. First, let me complete. Otherwise, don't stay in between. We chartered accountants who deal all the business, all the economic things, day-to-day economic activities at ground level. We know it well, and we have seen it in the last 4 years. The direct tax collection from 5,58,000 crore to 10,02,000 crore. From indirect tax from 4,73,000 to 9,11,000 crore. So it has been doubled in 4 years. The way direct tax, indirect tax, the market cap has increased by 40%. If you take any such thing, well, how can the tax to GDP ratio, because if GDP is going up, then definitely that never increases. But that has also gone up from 10 to 11.3. So you can say the way it is increasing, the way country is growing, we should be positive towards the country. And the such persons coming during the election time, they were there in last 2-3 years.
Okay.
Spoken that time.
So if I may,
just prior to election, it is totally politically motivated thing. And here the persons who have signed, the chartered accountants who have signed are who are chartered accountants committee, the persons who are past presidents, the person who are independent director, the person who are CMD, CEOs, the person who are dealing with business daily, those persons have said.
Okay,
so
Mr. Sharma.
Ridiculous on part of those persons who have gathered and tried to motivate few names and try to put and tarnish the image.
Well, it's very nice to see that you are so passionate about defending this, Mr. Sharma. Now, if I could just ask you this question, and I understand obviously the data that you're suggesting, because between demonetization and GST, obviously chartered accountants have had a great time in the last few years, but that's not reflective of the entire economy, just putting it out there. My question to you also is, you say none of these economists or social scientists ever made an appeal in those 54 long years that India is on a slow track and is being left behind. Now, when India has become the fastest growing economy in the world, they are worried about the credibility of the data. Is it their intention to scare foreign investors?
Politically motivated.
Correct. Now, can I please finish my point, Mr. Sharma? I'll give you time to respond. Before you joined us, I asked both of the economists who are on the panel tonight if they have in the past spoken out and been part of, signature movements and campaigns against government policies. And they said yes. And they, in fact, one of them also pointed out that they have raised issues about government policies during UPA's era with UPA's pet schemes, pet projects. So, will you now admit that perhaps you did not do your research properly and you slammed these economists without bothering to find out whether or not they had raised their voice in the past?
I can say, but have you ever heard this 108 economists have raised word at a time?
I have also never heard that the government for 2.5 years has kept away all the crucial data from us.
Once in a while. But I can say one thing. The world knows, the IMF says that India is growing, World Bank says India is growing. If the World Bank's rating of ease of doing business from 142, it has come to 77. Everyone who is dealing into companies, he knows that loan is getting faster, company formation is getting faster, all type of things are getting faster. This Aadhaar working and all has made a lot of hurdles clear. These are things we need to know that India is growing and we need to be positive about the economy and so give a positive picture in the world. Because this person, 108 economists, they're quoted by some of the foreign newspapers and all.
So what is wrong in that?
Of the country. No, it is wrong because India is going by to create a negative image about India.
Well, the entire world also knows, and I think you will agree with me on the fact that the private investment in our country has been at a significant low in the last few years, Mr. Sharma. I know my facts, and these are the facts. In the last few years, maximum amount of infra spending that has happened has come only from the government and not from the private sector. If you say the private sector is so hunky-dory, why aren't companies investing more in projects in our country? Ease of doing business. ranking doesn't make any difference if people and companies within our own country do not have the confidence to set up more projects.
Why ease of doing business doesn't make any difference? Why rolling out of GST in a big country like India doesn't make any difference? Why it is so? Because GST rolling out in the best of the system which is carried out anywhere in the world.
Okay, I'm going to let two of our experts respond to you.
It was a teaching problem of 5-7 months, and we were the one who chartered accountants who opposed that it is a lot of teaching problems are there. But now, when it is settled down, now when the inflation has come down, now when the rates have gone down, now when the tax is increasing, then definitely we will say that is now everything is fine.
Okay, let me get our experts to respond to you. Mr. Ramakumar, I'm going to come to you first and then I'll go across to Professor Nagaraj. Mr. Rajesh Sharma, do listen in because you've made some very, very grave allegations against these economists. Let them respond to the points that you're making. Mr. Ramakumar, to you.
I'll ignore the personal allegations that Mr. Sharma made. But the point is that the letter by the chartered accountants are filled with errors and wrong informations. Let me list out one or two. Professor Nagaraj is here. He will elaborate on some of these if I miss them out. So miss something out. First is that they have said that there are a set of years in which GDP has been revised in the past as well in certain with certain base years. Let me just read out a sentence from there. They have said that the GDP has been revised earlier in August 1967, January 1978, February 1988. 99 and 2006. These are completely wrong. There were no GDP data revisions in any of these years. So the writers of this letter have completely missed out when GDP data was revised in India. They don't even know this basic fact. So who is politically motivated? In fact, data were revised in 60-61, 70-71, 80-81, 93-94 and 2004-05 and then now in 2011-12.
Correct.
Not in any of the years that the chartered accountants are suggesting.
Correct.
So it is filled with errors like this. I can list them out, but I'll sort of leave something out for Professor Nagaraj as well because he's my.
Could that be a difference between when it was done and the base year that was taken? Yeah,
the base year upon which the revisions were made.
Yes,
right?
That's what you're referring to.
That's what I'm referring to.
Yes.
They say that GDP data was revised in X, Y, Z number of years where there was no revisions.
Okay.
So revisions were actually in a different set of years.
Correct.
Right? So they don't even have that primary information on when the revisions took place. How do you take this letter seriously?
Okay.
Number one.
Yes.
Number two is that there is a narrative being constructed here, which is that India is growing fast. India is growing faster than China. India is fastest growing economy in the world. But let me put out why this narrative is problematic. This narrative is problematic because they begin from a wrong premise. What is that wrong premise? The revised GDP data based on the 2011-12 base year, which we are criticizing, right, as problematic. So you take a problematic set of GDP figures and put them out in the open. Of course, World Bank will take it because you're officially putting it out. Right? The World Bank doesn't compute India's GDP separately.
So World Bank doesn't do it, IMF doesn't do it. All of these international agencies are actually just taking the growth data what we are giving them. They're not doing their own service.
They don't do their own service.
No, I just want to make this clear to our viewers also to understand, because when you say that how can, if the World Bank and the IMF are backing us, how do you have a problem? Because they're not really scrutinizing our growth CDs.
They may have comments, but the point is whatever India puts out as official data, that's what they're taking. Right? Now, so you start with the wrong premise and create a narrative. Why is that narrative wrong? I'll just take 30 seconds. Economists talk about something called a smell test. Smell test means that is your growth rate associated with growth in a set of corroborative indicators as well.
Correct.
So you look at your savings rate, investment rate, you look at your growth in exports and so on. So let's look at the savings rate. It has fallen between 2011 and 2018. It falls from 34.6% of the GDP to 30% of the GDP. Investment rate falls from 39% of the GDP to 32% of the GDP. Exports of goods and services as a share of GDP falls from 24% to 19%. But your GDP growth rate rises from 5.5% to 8-9%.
Doesn't make sense, doesn't add up.
It fails the smell test, as we call it.
Yes.
Right? This is what, so you start from a wrong premise and you create an artificial narrative out of it.
Okay.
And then make India, and call others as contrarian.
Yes, well, I am not an economist, so I'm going to go across to another economist who may have a contrarian view to that. Professor Aman Agarwal, good evening. Thank you for joining us. Rajesh Sharma, I'll just come back to you. Let's just Professor Agarwal respond to this, and then I will go across to Rajesh Sharma and Santosh Mehrotra.
I've had the honor of working at the World Bank almost 18, 19 years back at the Financial Sector Development Department. And certainly the data comes from the government. But I don't think it is appropriate to understand that they just look at the data and publish it the way it is done. And even if it is only World Bank or the IMF or other agencies like this, thinking that some of us think that they just publish whatever the government gives, please understand we have private agencies like Moody's and others also looking at India, and they have upgraded us as well. So just to look at it. Secondly, when you talk of savings rate, 33-35%, my dear friend, was not a good rate, because that means we are not investing in the economy. 30% is fairly a comfortable rate even today. So given the fact that we have had major shocks in the economy, 30% saving rate is still a fairly high rate of
where is investment
savings
rate?
In a country like India. So let me complete, sir. Secondly, Tanvi, you mentioned about private investment.
Yes.
Please understand, for the last year and a half, there has been a deep scrutiny on the bank financing which has happened in the past. It had become a freeway where we saw companies were actually swindling away with funds taken from the banks as loans and taking loans after loans and loans after loans, which has been brought to a check. Naturally, when that has been brought to a check, we would not see that kind of a momentum in private investment typically coming in. Despite that fact, we've still had about $5.5 to about $6 billion coming every month from international investment itself. And we, apart from the tax figures. So I'm not saying that everything is very good. It's in a country like India, which is democratic, we certainly like to hear all different kinds of views and go to hear and debate about these issues. But just to say that whatever the other person is saying is completely bluntly off and wrong, I think it is bad. Having worked at the bank,
please tell me about the investment rate.
So you are at least accepting that there is a slowdown, or not even a slowdown. Private investment has not bounced back since UPA era. Professor Agarwal, irrespective of what the reason is, I'm not sitting here and blaming the government for it. I'm just saying that is a reality, whether or not it is because the banks have become cautious or banks have lost money or for any other reason. Let's agree on what the reality is before we start talking about this or painting this India shining star.
The government has already said that there has been slowdown.
Exactly.
Even the chief economist in the past.
Okay, let me bring in our other panelists. Mr. Santosh Mehrotra wanted to come in as well with a point.
There's no doubt about that. But the issue is that is
Professor
the data
Agarwal, just
appropriate
hang
or
on
not?
for a minute. Santosh Mehrotra had a point. Yes, Santosh Mehrotra, please.
Sir, Mr. Agarwal, may I, sir? May I? Sir.
Please.
We have become the fastest growing large economy in the world. Let's take that be that as it may. The fact of the matter is that this is because China has slowed down. That's why we are the fastest growing large economy in the world. Point one. Point two, we were the second fastest growing large economy in the world just after China for at least 10 or 12 years for the past 10 or 12 years. So I don't know what the big deal is about our being the fastest growing large economy in the world. The real point is that our level of income is so low that we have to grow fast for the next 20 years. If we don't grow consistently fast for the next 20 years, there is not a hope in hell that we will reduce poverty. So let us not just pat ourselves on the back because we've become the fastest growing large economy in the world because we were already growing quite fast, reasonably good, and China's growth rate has come down. This is point three. Point four, the real question that I want to ask our chartered accountants is the following. Why is it that independent economists have not replied to 108 independent economists? Why is it that the chartered accountants find it necessary to reply to the 108 economists? And this is the reason why Ram Kumar is absolutely right that they've made some basic, simple errors. So let's just take apart some of the things that the chartered accountants talk about. One is they talk about, our poverty information, we've been reducing poverty, but we don't have nationally produced poverty data since 2011-12. And the consumption expenditure survey that was done by the NSS has not been revealed, so we don't know, because that's the only relevant basis for our estimating what the poverty is. On the other hand, the Brookings Institution has published a clock on its website, based on a paper written by Homi Kharas and some team members, which essentially draws upon IMF projections about what our growth rate is, and draws upon 2011-12 poverty data and says, if the elasticity of poverty to reduction to growth is what it was until 2012, then our poverty has come down to this. But everyone is still questioning the GDP data itself. So how are you going to make an estimation of what the poverty elasticity is? Point one and point two, we have reasonably solid data which says that because jobs are not growing, therefore real wages have been relatively stagnant. They've been growing, but growing very little. And as a result of which, poverty could not have declined too much at all.
Okay.
And the final point I would wish to make is that regardless of how high the investment rate might be and how well our exports, the government claims, might be doing, the fact remains that our absolute level of merchandise exports are actually lower than over the last 4 years, every year, than they were in 2014. Our investment rate is lower than it was then. Our agricultural growth rate is 2.5% in the last 4 years, while it was 5% in the preceding 5 years. Despite all these underlying estimates, the GDP growth rate is now supposed to be higher in the last 4 years as compared to the preceding 5 years. It does not stand to reason, Tanvi.
Yes. Okay. So let's get in Rajesh Sharma to respond to that, Mr. Sharma, because those were the questions. Mr. Mohan Agarwal, I'll come to you, but Rajesh Sharma first. That's the question directly to you, Rajesh Sharma. Firstly, why aren't independent economists speaking out against these 108 politically motivated economists? Secondly, what about the data on poverty, to which I will also add, what about the data on unemployment? What about the data on farmer suicides? What about the data on crime? Where is all this data? Can you respond to Mr. Rajesh Sharma?
First, let me say to my good friend, he told that we are highest doing economy because China has slowed down. But in the world, if he knows economy well, he needs to check the world over, all the countries. The economy of most of the countries are going. When most of the countries' economy are slowing down, at that time, if India is growing with a higher pace, then definitely India has done well, number one. Number two, he was not fine in saying that just preceding government, the economy was going in that same pace. He knows the data of 2013-14, when inflation was 10%, and the economy was growing with a pace of 5%, and our fiscal deficit was going with 5% or so. So he knows the data, and if he doesn't know, then I'm not aware. Second thing, let me tell about the change. Hope you know it well, that this 2011 base, why it was required. Because there's a new series which was compliant with the United Nations guidelines in the system of national accounts, 2008. And that was required. So for that, it is must that we have to comply and we have to change the system in 2011. Secondly, one more thing. She told very categorically that why chartered accountants are replying, why chartered accountants cannot reply. If he says that chartered accountant knows economy less, or chartered accountants are less capable, or chartered accountants deal economy less in day-to-day scenario at ground level and at practical level, they deal more than the economists, one thing. Because economists talk only on data, but the chartered accountants talk on all the factual things which are going on.
Okay, point taken there. Of course, nobody is undermining the importance of chartered accountants. Every salaried employee needs one to help them out. No, I get your point, Mr. Sharma.
I was hearing everyone patiently. Please listen. One more thing about the base year, he told very categorically. We have told the base year of national accounts, whatever it was, from 1948-49 to then it shifted to 1960-61. That was done in August 1967. It was not in August 1967, but that same thing, like it was done in 2016, it was done for 2011. Similar thing, I can say, from 60-61 to 70-71, it was January 1978. You need to know that. And similarly, from 1970-71 to 80-81, it was done in February 1988. And similarly, from 80-81 to 93-94, same was done in February 1999. So basically, like similarly from
yes, I think I pointed that out as well, that that's probably going to be a response on whether or not you're counting it from base year or when it was done. But let me go across, point taken there. Let me go across to Professor Nagaraj. Professor Nagaraj, to what is being discussed here and to the specific statement put out by the CAs, and Rajesh Sharma says, why can't chartered accountants question the economists? We know economy better than you because we are dealing with the reality every day.
Yeah, first of all, about the chartered accountants statement. There are many mistakes in that. One thing which has been propagated is that it is the first time that Indian national accounts or Indian GDP is compliant with the United Nations UN SMA, which is again completely false. India has always followed the UN SMA, and the previous series followed the UN SMA 1994, which was. Therefore, India has always been compliant with the UN SLA. Okay, that's the first part. Secondly, the chartered accountant statement talks about the ease of doing business. I think that index has serious problems as known to economists worldwide. This index has no correlation to increase in investments globally, and there are very interesting cases where country like Russia improved its ranking from 120 in 2012 to 20 in 2018, but Russia's investment rate did not go up. And finally, it is widely known that the use of doing business index is a politically motivated index. And as admitted by the former chief economist of World Bank, Paul Romer, who got Nobel Prize last year, said that the index in Chile moved quite with the changes in the political regime. Whenever the socialists came to power, the index went up and the rank went down, and when the conservatives came, it went up. So I think the entire exercise of ease of doing business is questionable. When it comes to India, it must be pointed out that much of the improvement in India's ranking is entirely on account of the methodological change, which has been widely admitted. And there's a well-known study by Center for Global Governance in Washington, which has shown that the improvement in India's ranking is entirely on account of methodological change. So I think the report has serious the chartered accountant statement has serious loopholes in the information they have provided. Okay, on their surely the chartered accountants have right to have their view like anybody else. Okay, but one must understand the chartered accountants do not have a macroeconomic view, because that their training is to look at firms, that is microeconomic units. Okay, whereas macroeconomics is the discipline which helps people to look at the economy as a whole. This is what we call the aggregate economy. We look at the aggregate production, aggregate consumption, aggregate employment, and that can be achieved only by large nationwide sample survey data or an estimates like GDP, right? So they cannot be acquired by simply looking at firms. In India, we know that the corporate sector, even by the new accounts, account for only 34%. Whereas two-thirds of GDP comes outside the corporate sector, about which chartered accountants' understanding is unfortunately not right, because that is not their expertise. That's the reason why macroeconomists insist on getting the picture of the economy as a whole, and that they get only by nationwide sample surveys and aggregate estimates like GDP.
Right.
Okay?
So
this is very important to keep in mind.
I take your point. Frankly, I think this debate would be a lot more easier and things would be clearer if we actually had a lot of the data that we need to stack things up together. Right now, we're looking at different data points and trying to put it together and coming up with different versions. Aman Agarwal, don't you agree that if we had more concrete data available on employment, this debate would be easier? Because right now, the government seems to be quoting to us CII reports rather than any established institution report.
You see, Tanvi, data is a very complicated thing. It only gives what we want actually to project. And we have seen that happen in the United States. We have seen that happen in India. And statisticians would know about it very well, how WPI, which does not reflect an appropriate index, is still quoted, and how WPI was changed to CP in the US, and the employment data, which is projected by United States with perfect information coming in, could not even reflect, whereas they were having a unemployment rate of about 20 years back when I was there at the World Bank of almost about 16-17%, whereas they were projecting anywhere about 8 or 9% only. So, data is something which is very complicated to look at. What is a sample? What size should it be? How do you screen data? How do you smoothen data? Let's not get into the debate of statistics. One thing which is very clear, and I think one of my colleagues did mention, is about the GDP figure. I think every one of us knows that we're a $2.6 trillion economy today. Whether China has gone down or Russia has gone down or America has gone down, but we have at least gone up in our absolute figures of GDP growth. And that is certainly not the actual figure, because we know very well that we have a very strong parallel economy. And I think all economists who look at a macroeconomic perspective would know that we have a very strong parallel economy in this country, which is still not gone away after demonetization. And that also contributes to GDP growth, which never gets captured in it. And this is what the government has been trying to put forward, is that the statistical data by some of these agencies should have modulated up to the factors, that there are other factors of job creation, employment.
Yeah, but why haven't they done it in 5 years?
And
we can debate the merit of government's calculation versus, the old way of calculation only when we have the new calculation.
And I am not questioning government or these people here. What I am telling you is that the data, these statistical agencies should have actually introduced a mechanism. The economists working there should have introduced an mechanism of introducing that component of even job creation, where it's not getting captured by EPFO or government data for so many years, because there are new methods, and that's what government is trying to say.
All right, I am completely running out of time here, but I'm going to give 30 seconds to Mr. Mehrotra for the last word before we wrap up on the show. Mr. Mehrotra, go ahead, please.
On the GDP estimate, I want to remind our audience that the chairman of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council had himself questioned the new estimates that have been put out by the CSO most recently, which are in contradiction to the estimates that were put out by the committee of Sudipto Mandal, the National Statistical Commission. And the point that the chairman of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council made was that it's possible that the reason why these new estimates seem to be, for the last 4 years, seem to be higher than the estimates for the preceding 10 years is because the deflator used has question marks around it. He left it very, pregnant with meaning, but he didn't say very much more than that. And I think we need to keep this in mind. And so this is all I would like to say at this point, that when the Prime Minister's chairman, the Economic Advisory Council himself is raising question marks about these most recent GDP estimates, then I think we should all, sit up and notice.
Well, Niti Aayog isn't, and that's what is told to us every time that we have this conversation, and somebody from the government side will come and say, but Niti Aayog told us this, and Niti Aayog said that, and that's all fine then. But I'm going to thank all of our panelists for joining us on this debate. You know, I don't understand why we have to build this entire narrative. The minute you start questioning something linked to the government, you've become anti-government, anti-establishment, politically motivated. Why will anybody in this country not want to believe that we are growing at a healthy level if we indeed were growing at a healthy level? Why should I be in denial of that? Why should any economist be in denial of that? It doesn't make any sense. One would be happy if you're doing well in life, if your family, friends, people around you are doing well, if your business is doing well. If you're asking questions, it's because you perhaps don't see merit in the numbers that are being put out. Now, this is what Finance Minister said. I have given some details of economic development in India over the last 5 years with empirical evidence. The evidence shows rapid progress in economic fortunes of all Indians, irrespective of caste or creed. Only those who fail to develop the Indian economy, despite being in power for several decades, cannot witness the reality that is staring in their faces. The whole world, which is the IMF and the World Bank, regard India as the fastest growing major economy. 130 crore Indians believe it, only the compulsive contrarians don't. Perhaps it is time, Mr. Jaitley, to have a conversation with these compulsive contrarians. At the end of the day, they too are Indians. They may not all be politically motivated. There may be some base to the questions that they are asking. The fact of the matter is, here is a list of data that you and your government aren't willing to give us. Data on unemployment, a report by NSSO that would have given us a sense about the job creation situation in our country has not been released since 2011-2012. The report on socio-economic caste census, which would have given us a sense of the status of the OBCs, has not been released since 2011-2012. The report on the rapid survey of children done by the Ministry of Women and Child Development has not been released since 2013-2014. The data on number of farmer suicides in our country at a time when farm crisis, agrarian crisis, is one of the biggest boiling issues in our country, has not been released since 2016. The data on foreign direct investment statistics, something that the government really has been speaking a lot about, has not been released by the Ministry of Commerce or DIPP since June 2018. The data on crime in India, whether it is accidents and suicides, whether it is prison statistics and kidnappings and abduction, none of it has been released by the National Crime Bureau in the last 2 years. If there is nothing of concern, give us the data and end this debate. Thank you so much for joining us.